Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth in our series looking at the 7 seismic shifts necessary to move up to enterprise leadership. I'm joined again by Professor Michael Watkins. Michael, thanks for being here for the fifth in this series of 7 shifts. Today we're looking at, I guess, a very important shift here. We're talking about moving from a problem solver to an agenda setter. Now, some people might listen today and say, wow, that's not necessarily what I would have expected. I would have thought that as I move up an organization, more problems are coming to my desk. My role is to eradicate those problems. But what you're saying is, no, you should be moving away from problem solver to agenda setter. Some people might say, that sounds a bit counterintuitive.
Good, because that's a good basis for conversation then. What I say about this, Paul, is, you can come up a long way in organizations by being good at solving problems that other people are defining, right? That you're there, you've got an approach, an analytical capability, a set of insights that let you take a well-defined problem and really turn the crank and come out with good solutions. And that's terrific, right? And we don't want to pretend that that capability doesn't remain important. But what happens when you're the person of last resort, right? What happens when you're the one that has to define what problems people are going to focus in on? Because there are a million of them, right? There's a broad range of things. We could focus on that. We could focus on this. We could go, up and down and sideways. One of the core roles that you play as enterprise leader is the lens, the focusing lens of what we're really going to spend our time on. What problems fundamentally are we going to work on solving? And if you do a good job of that, then your organization's energy gets deployed in an effective way. If you do a bad job, people are running off in all directions.
So does setting the agenda just mean being good at working out what's a priority?
It's a big piece of it. And I think, you said just. But there's a lot more than, to say that is to kind of, I think, underestimate how hard that is, right? I mean, to be able to say these are the vital 4 priorities that our business as a whole is going to focus in on for the next year, and pick the right ones and really stick to them, right, and not let things kind of go all over the place. This is hard work. First of all, understanding what are those crucial issues, right? What really are the 3 or 4 vital things that we need to focus our attention on? And getting clarity in your own mind about those things, right? And having them be the right ones. And then having the discipline to really drive that kind of alignment down through the organization around those priorities. That's a huge thing to do, and it's very challenging. But if you don't do it, what happens? We're all over the place.
So one of the books that you've written, The First 90 Days, talks about leaders taking on these new roles. How quickly should I be getting an understanding of the priorities? Within the first 3 months, should I have a clear view of what the priorities are? Does it need to be quicker than that? This may be company and situation specific. For people watching today and saying, yeah, I've got it. You've got to really focus on what's priority. How long should it take to get that information?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, you said, is it situation specific? And the answer is yes. Okay, so back to turnarounds versus realignments versus sustaining success. You're coming into a turnaround environment. You're going to have to be laser beam-like in figuring out what's going wrong. You're going to have to be stopping the bleeding. You're going to be needing to take some actions pretty quickly, whether they're turning over people in the team, shutting down things that aren't working. There's an action orientation that's implicit. And a leadership style, by the way, that's implicit with going through the turnaround. Contrast that with a situation where it's more of a sustaining success or potentially realignment situation. You're well advised to take your time, right? Because what you don't want to do is be doing damage to a business that's functioning pretty well. So if it takes a couple months for you to really figure out what the core priorities should be, that's fine, right? It's much more dangerous to have the action imperative at a moment like that. Now, that said, you let too much time go by, and I've seen examples of this, and I think 3 months is not a bad benchmark. You let too much time go by where the organization doesn't get a sense that you have a direction, right, that you've got some priorities, then people begin to get pretty nervous. And you need to be the gauge of what the right moment is, because the other thing is you're never going to have all the information. You're never going to be perfectly certain. You're in a turnaround, you can afford to take more risks, though, typically, than you can with a more successful business.
You talk there about you need to be the gauge. So obviously there's some data crunching to be done here, the conversations to be had. But when you're trying to get a feel for now's the right time to go public with no, I should wait a bit longer. It sounds like great agenda setters also need to have pretty strong emotional intelligence.
Oh, absolutely, right? Because so much of the agenda setting piece is gauging people's readiness to go down the road with you, right? Are they going to be able to follow you down these particular roads, right? So I think that's an absolutely indispensable piece of it. I think also part of that emotional intelligence is putting together the right advice and counsel network that can help you refine your sense of what you want to do here, really refine your agenda, make sure, test it with you, right? Be sure that it's really ready for prime time so that when you take it out, people don't go like, oh my God, right? So no, I think that's a really key piece of it.
So you've got to be able to get a bit of a feel and perception for what's going on. It sounds like you've got to be great at driving change. You talked about different kinds of change. You've got to be a great change agent to do this job.
So I think there's two pieces to it, right? One is really having a very deep understanding of what's going on in the external environment, right? Because you can't set an agenda if you don't understand the external environment. Having a pretty deep understanding of what's going on in the internal environment with the climate and the culture of the organization and seeing if there's mismatches. And then, yes, absolutely defining, what are the key changes that we need to pursue and what magnitude over what time period. Right? I mean, if we're in a turnaround, we're moving fast. We've got an agenda that's got to be set quickly. We're going to take some quick actions. We're going to take that axe and start hacking off limbs. We're in a realignment environment. It's back to the conversation. Maybe it's culture. Maybe it's continuous improvement that we need to be focusing in on. Maybe it's the learning organization piece that we need to be emphasizing.
So you made a fleeting reference there to external and internal focus, which we can't gloss over. I mean, I guess that's got to be so crucial. How do you find the balance between focusing on what's going on in the competitive arena and focusing on what's happening or not happening internally? How do you strike that balance?
So it really depends on the situation, I think, but what I would say is that as you become an enterprise leader, your focus almost automatically has to go more external than it was previously. And we'll talk about that a bit more when we get to talking about diplomacy. That said, it's very dangerous for a leader to become disconnected with what's happening inside the organization, right? Or again, think you can delegate that. I see this sometimes happen where you've got like a CEO and a COO and they've kind of defined themselves as, Ms. outside and Mr. inside. And that's, in general, a kind of a dangerous division because, you really do need to have a reasonable understanding of what's happening inside the organization to be effective, especially if, as you say, part of agenda setting is really about leading change. How can you possibly know what kind of change to lead if you're not in touch with what's happening inside the business?
Michael, I think that's a great place to leave it for today. Thank you for sharing with us this fifth seismic shift, moving from problem solver to agenda setter. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.